All right, case 7.4 by Jacob Lucas. Is it gonna switch slides? There we go. All right, Malden Mills. That's what this case is about. They were founded in 1906. Malden Mills, or the Polartec, is a premium textile solutions manufacturer, and they invented modern synthetic fleece in 1981. So they are a clothing manufacturer. So at the beginning, the Malden Mills is a privately held company that started in Massachusetts. They produced in fabric that evolved to manufacture Polartec, an advanced fleece fabric that became a favorite of outdoor clothers. So they would typically produce these Polartec, or these advanced fleece fabric, and then they would sell that to be used by products such as LL Bean, Patagonia, Land's End, and more. So basically they were the product manufacturer, and then they would send it to different brands and corporations that would then make that into their products. Their CEO, Aaron Feuerstein, has 2,400 employees in a small town in Massachusetts, but one of their foundational principles is that he refuses to move production overseas when most competitors began doing so. So this was one of the key factors that really made Malden Mills who they are, is they were key on being made in the USA and produced in the USA. They did not want to go overseas, despite the higher production costs. As well as the small town in Massachusetts was considered to be very poor, and a lot of the community revolved around needing the support from Malden Mills and the employer that was in that area. So a terrible tragedy occurred on December 11, 1995. A boiler exploded at the Malden Mills production facility, resulting in a fire that injured 27 people and destroyed three production buildings, leaving only one building left. So it pretty much it eliminated their company and their building size by 75%. This would have been very critical of terrible thing to happen for this company. Employees of Malden Mills began fearful that they would lose their job as a result, which is smart for them to think so. Surprisingly, instead, Mr. Feuerstein, I typoed there, announced on December 14th, 1995 that he would pay for the employee's salary for 90 days despite not being able to work. So this was very nice of him, because it's not like these employees were able to see this coming. This was just a freak tragic accident. And he took it another step further. Mr. Feuerstein continued the promise for 6 months until 90% of his workers were able to return to work. But ultimately, this decision costed the company $25 million in estimated. The insurance came in for the loss of the fires and the 3 buildings that were destroyed. Mr. Feuerstein receives $300 million in insurance money as a result of the fire, then announces that they will reconstruct the plant at the cost of $430 million, making it a state-of-the-art and environmentally friendly environment. Which is, that's a huge undertaking to go on when they just had such a critical strike against their business, resulting in having to get a loan for an additional $130 million to complete the reconstruction, which is, an enormous amount of debt for a company. Due to the public knowledge and awareness, their customers and fans of the company raised over $1 million in donations to help support and recover. By September of 1997, the new buildings were completed, resulting in a 10% loss of employees due to improved technology and efficiency in the state-of-the-art facilities. By the end of 2001, Malden Mills had a debt of $140 million and no side out. Due to the fires, Malden Mills had to discontinue the upholstery division in 1996. With Malden's customers growing more impatient due to the lack of production, they began quickly losing customers. Their competition, an inexpensive fleece from companies in the Asian markets, began taking their customers. So other companies that were making similar products began producing their products overseas and were able to charge a much lower cost, ultimately taking Malden Mills' business. in an attempt to rally to try and save their business, Malden Mills releases a new electric fabrics that were heatable. This, coupled with a fresh marketing campaign, allowed Malden to grow its customers once again and gain a new military contract. They were able to get, it was a deal for $16 million with the Department of Defense, which was huge help at this time. Despite this, they were heavily still in debt. With the help of the U.S. House and Senate representative members, were able to convince the bank loaners to not bankrupt the company, but to give Mr. Feuerstein an additional $35 million. So not only are they already $140 million in debt, they've added on another $35 million on top of that. When even like that new military contract that they got, the most recent one that helped them, there was only a $16 million contract. So they were, yeah, we'll get into that later. In 2002 and 2003, the union disputes began erupting. A threatened strike in December of 2004 resulted in a new 3-year contract that proved to be very expensive for the company. So their decision to stay and be an American-made company was costing and increasing the level of costs and decreasing the profitability for Malden Mills, already on top of all the looming debt. Military, in 2006, Malden Mills was able to achieve a $16 million contract with the Department of Defense. Oh, yes, that's the other one. So they were awarded multiple military contracts. I had misspoken on that, though. One prior was not as big as this one, $16 million in 2006. In February of 2007, a group of private equity investors took over the company known as Polartec LLC, owned by Chrysalis Partners. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. So the company was then completely taken over and bought out. By July of 2007, the company announced that its last shipment from the factory, Pension Benefit Guaranteed Corporation, had to take over the company because pension program was underfunded by 49%. The assets of the company were later sold as a result of the missed pension plan payments. The PBGC was able to end their commitment, resulting in all employees losing half of their pension. 4 of the 5 production buildings were purchased and turned into a living community. So essentially it was the company proved to be insolvent and wasn't able to make enough money to pay off the debt. So a group of outside investors came in, purchased out the majority share of the company, and then liquidated the company essentially and just sold out the different assets to try and make their money back that they took off from the business. Outside resource, here's this. I got the video up here.
How could I take 3,000 people and throw them into the street because of this accidental fire? It wasn't their fault.
Aaron Feuerstein in a 1996 interview with Chronicle, explaining his headline-making decision to keep paying his employees after the 1995 fire that wiped out Malden Mills. That loyalty and generosity made all the difference to Stephen Jesmer, who worked in the mills for 43 years, as did his wife, parents, and 5 brothers.
He was in the family. If you work there, he wants your wife to work there too. Your kids to work there, aunts, uncles. I'm sorry to hear that he passed. He was just a good man.
Jesmer recalls the day he watched the mill burn. Miraculously, no one died, but Feuerstein understood a part of Lawrence died that day, and he did not abandon this city.
And that was the kind of corporate citizenship that we needed back in 1995, and we need again today.
Aaron Feuerstein died Thursday evening after complications from a fall in his Brookline home. He was 95.
What he did back in 1995 was truly outstanding, and we can't forget that. He's an important figure in our city's history.
He wanted to give people jobs, He wanted to help them out, just make life better for everybody, not just make a buck.
And we just talked to his son, who says that he lived a full life. Daniel Feuerstein says his dad loved this town. He loved these employees. That love went both ways, obviously. In a 2002 interview with 60 Minutes, Feuerstein was asked what he'd want his tombstone to read. He answered, quote, "He'd done his damnedest. I didn't give up, that I did the right thing."
All right. So yeah, we see clearly it had a positive response from those involved in the situation, those who worked for him, and those around him thought it was awesome, that he was truly a great man. ethical theory, utilitarian. This theory described as an attempt to achieve a balancing effort in which minimizes harm and maximizes the benefits for the majority of the situation. A great example I took out of the textbook was some of the issues to which we have applied utilitarianism include those that involve some form of rationing of resources in order to provide for all. I think this relates very closely to our case because it explains Mr. Feurenstein's thinking when he made the decision to pay for all of his employees for 6 months after the production facility was destroyed, costing him and the business an additional $25 million that they really didn't have. However, you could see him in the video. He said 3,000 people. How is he going to just fire a bunch of people over a tragic occurrence that's nobody's fault? It's just a really sad situation. Categorical imperative. This theory states that people are used for a means to an end, creating an imbalance or unfair operations. For example, there are those who find it unethical to have workers in developing nations labor in garment sweatshops for pennies per hour. The pennies per hour wage seems unjust to them. However, suppose the company were operating under one of its universal principles: always pay a fair wage to those who work for it. A fair wage in the country might be pennies, and the company could argue, I could work for that wage if I lived in I could work for that wage if I lived in that country. The company owner could also argue. So essentially, they're saying that the fair wage in living situations is relative depending on your country. But if I lived in the United States, I would not work for that wage. It would require a much higher wage and would want benefits. And we do all of that, and we do provide all of that to our U.S. workers. The employer applies the same standard, but the wages are different. So essentially, the argument is it's not necessarily unethical to produce things at a lower cost across the world or in another country because you're still supporting that ecosystem where they are. However, it's not the same as or equivalent to life in America. I think this relates to the case because it is part of the foundation that makes Malden Mills who they are. They are proud to be an American company that is made in the USA. However, that decision results in them having higher production costs across the board. Employee wages, benefits, location, maintenance, upkeep, as well as all the normal business expenses that required insurance, all of it, leases, loans. The decision to pay his employees for an additional 6 months after their fire cost them $25 million. The decision to build a state-of-the-art production facility costed them $430 million. The additional cost for workers from a labor strike in the early 2000s. Additional costs. All of these decisions combined is what led to such crippling debt, and despite the success in their industry. They were one of the top-tier products in their industry. They were receiving military and government contracts for $16 million and had a wide variety of public outreach, even fundraising $1 million just to help them get back on their feet. They were just pumping out spending way too much money and not growing at a gradual pace. Moral relativists. This theory is best described as time and place ethics, meaning that depending on situations, ethics can change and shift to fit the needs of that situation. So, if you're a parent and your child is starving, stealing a loaf of bread is ethically correct. I thought that was a great example of trying to rationalize or conceptualize what this really is. I think this relates to the case because Mr. Feurenstein was acting in the short term in what would benefit him and his team the most, what he thought was doing the best good at the time. His decision was made without the goal of trying to improve the company. His decision was made with the goal of trying to best improve his company without hurting those who work for him. So he was trying to not fire all 3,000 employees or leaving those people out to dry when they may not know or have any other stable income. However, the decisions he made resulting in the company being sold and turned their production facility into a mixed income living area. So long term, he wasn't able to support those 3,000 people for very long because of the decisions he made. While it was kind in the moment, it didn't help them in the long term. Especially their pensions. Resolution. Mr. Feurenstein, despite leading the company to become as successful as they did, made critical mistakes when scaling their business, which ultimately led to its failure. Mr. Feurenstein should have supported his employees after their tragic fire. However, it did not have to be more than 6 months. While it is very kind and helped his employees, there are always more jobs available in the area, and it was not realistic to retain all 2,400 employees when their production was shrunk from 4 buildings to 1. So, I mean, they lost 75% of their production buildings in square footage. I mean, there's no way they could have retained all that. At the end of the day, it is a tragedy. In order to keep the business running for those it can still employ, it must make the best decisions for them. Later on, resulting in their pension program being underfunded by 49% and their employees' pensions cut in half. So, I mean, long term, for that 6 months, he was able to support the business, and up until 2007, until the business was purchased out and liquidated, he wasn't able to support them longer. I mean, the people that worked day in and day out and wanted to be able to retire and support themselves off of the pension that they thought they were going to be able to receive, they weren't able to receive. So, I mean, did he really help them? Mr. Feurenstein also made a mistake when he decided to rebuild the production facility bigger and better than before, costing the company a massive $430 million. This is, I think, where he primarily made his wrong decision. The decision should have been made to rebuild, but slowly and strategically, instead of all of buildings at once. Beginning maybe with 1 or 2 buildings to maintain steady growth to match the level of income the business was making. The business did not have the revenue to support such a large expansion all at once, resulting in the company going into $140 million in debt with no way of paying it off, which is ultimately what killed the company. It wasn't the fact that they weren't able to sell their fleece products. It was simply the fact that they were too far underwater, and they spent way too much money way too quickly. Industry standards and modern mills competition at the time also began moving production overseas, lowering their costs. It is important to Mr. Feurenstein and the company that they make their products in the USA. Moving all their production overseas would be a mistake. However, moving specific areas and tasks overseas while producing mostly in the USA allows the company to stay competitive with their margins. So, while it's a honorable and a respectful thing to try and maintain your made in the USA, produced in the USA standards, it also doesn't allow you to stay competitive in the industry. If your competition can charge 30, 40, 50% less than what your product is selling for, it doesn't matter if your product is better. A lot of people are going to go with the cheaper alternative just because it's cheaper. The fact is while you can still maintain that made and produced in the USA, are there certain aspects of your production and in the way you do business that you can outsource to overseas and in a way to mitigate costs and to increase your profit margins to stay competitive with those others who have no problem going overseas. Thank you. This has been the case.